Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Jackman Radio. I'm your host, Eric Jackman, joined by my twin brother, as always, Mike Jackman. And today is a big day for Jackman Radio, a big day for liberty and lovers of freedom all over the world. We are so honored to welcome Congressman Ron Paul to the show. Dr. Paul, how are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing fine. It's nice to be with you. And I do know, as I remember correctly, you might have been involved with some of my campaigns, and if that is true, I want to thank you for doing that in the past.
Oh, absolutely, Congressman. It was my honor to work on your campaign up here in New Hampshire in 2012.
Good.
I started on Gary Johnson's campaign, and then he, dropped out and fizzled out. And the five of us Gary Johnson staffers endorsed you, and my brother and I worked out of your Concord, New Hampshire office, hitting the phones, hitting doors. One of my responsibilities was to set up press credentials at some of your events. So I dealt with some of the fake news media, as Donald Trump calls them. And it was just a joy to work on your campaign. I mean, the energy, the enthusiasm. And when we came in second place behind Mitt Romney there, getting over a quarter of the vote here, we were just ecstatic.
It was great. But it happened because we had people like you out there doing it for the right reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the first time we ever got to see you speak and meet you was actually, I think, at your first house party in New Hampshire in 2006. I think it was a winter house party. And, it was a house full of like 100 people. And then to see the crowds, go from a small house party to a little, medium-sized events, and then eventually thousands of people, it just shows that the message really resonated then. And I think it still is today.
But, I remember that, I think, pretty clearly on that because I remember the house being very full and a lot of enthusiasm. And somebody came over and whispered to me, and I'm not letting out any secrets here, but somebody whispered to me, "Ron, don't worry, you're well protected here."
Oh, yeah.
So they said, well, you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. Well, kind of getting into it, Dr. Paul, I want to ask you a question from a friend of ours, Ricky Gray, who's also a military veteran and a supporter of yours. He would like to get your diagnosis on the state of our economy right now and where you see that going.
Well, it's going down, and it's going down a lot more yet. And it may have a snap downward because they might tomorrow, the next day, admit how bad it is already. And somebody said, well, how do you guys that look at Austrian economics, how do you make these predictions? How do you know this stuff is coming? And, I don't look at it that way. I've mentioned about housing bubbles and different things like that certain things would happen. But to take, for instance, the inflation, people refer to inflation as cost of living going up, CPI. That's not inflation by the Austrian Economic School. That is not the definition. The inflation comes when the Federal Reserve is motivated to print a lot of money. So once you print a lot of money and you mess up the interest rates for a year, 2 or 3 or 4, and we've been doing it for a long time, there's been tremendous inflation of the real stuff. Now we have to sort it out because what is unpredictable is exactly how these things get smoothed out and get rid of it, and you can't predict what the government is going to do. And that is a big job because that is, for instance, the price scale. People who are average people and just have to find food every month and go to the store and buy gasoline, their inflation rate might be 20%. But most people don't admit that, but people feel it and wonderful. So what that invites is a lot of misunderstanding, and yet the problems are out there. It has to be liquidated. And as far as predicting or anticipating is probably a better word, is that there's been a lot of debt, too much debt, and we're not working hard enough to pay off the debt. And eventually, no matter how powerful we are with our military and the health of our economy and having a reserve currency, it doesn't matter. The debt eventually will be too costly. And the longer it goes, and I figure this batch of monetary inflation started in 2008 with QEs. So it is massively distorted. The market says, and the market eventually wins. The market says it has to be liquidated. You can't have more debt, and you can't raise interest rates and all these things that happen. But the debt has to be liquidated. And there's only a couple ways you can do that. You can print money, or you could work harder and pay off the debt. Individuals have to work harder or take another job and pay off their debt. Governments don't do that. They liquidate debt by destroying the value of the money. And that's why we know that the inflation is here, because we have a measurement of that. And we know that there's intervention and malinvestment as a consequence of this. What we don't know is whether it's going to be tomorrow, next year, or exactly when people say, phew, throw in the towel, and that's it, folks. It'll come. But right now we're seeing the early stages of this. And I think shadow stats are accurate in making much better projections about what coming. And we're in a mess, and it's not going to be achieved with the Fed making another announcement on how they're going to tinker. Frequently I get questioned, what would you do, Ron, if you got to check the interest rates? Well, first thing is I would deny all responsibility. I'm not going to mess with them. Let the market mess with it. That'll liquidate it and get us all back in working order.
Yeah, absolutely. The economy is a mess right now. So one of the highlights from one of your presidential campaigns, I think it was the 2008 race, when you just absolutely schooled Giuliani and Gingrich and Romney and all those guys on foreign policy and the idea of blowback and all of that. And, you were obviously the great message of non-intervention and peace and a humble foreign policy. So I'm curious, Congressman, during your time in Congress, what would be like a highlight foreign trip that you made? And did you meet any like really cool or interesting foreign leaders that stand out in your experience?
Well, yeah, from a personal viewpoint, when it dawned on me that more people were listening to what I was trying to say than I ever dreamed of, because when I started talking about the monetary issue, which motivated me to run, it was just to talk about it. And that was in 1971 when the Bretton Woods was closed down and Nixon closed the gold window. I said, during that time, I didn't expect really much. And then I ran for Congress, and I assured my wife, don't worry about it. She was worried that I'd win. I said, don't worry about it. I said, I'm not going to be passing out any freebies. I'm just going to tell them we're in a mess and we have to do something. And of course, her prediction was that I would win. But what was exciting was that I went from a period of time, and that, you even mentioned one of the first meetings in 2006. Of course, I had gone to some colleges because I was interested in the Mises Institute, and I had my own foundation. And going to campuses to see if there were any libertarians, I could get 10 or 15 out. They had little clubs. And somebody said, what do you do that for? And I said, well, I get it off my chest or something. So they were small. But in opposition to that type of a really, really low key, I guess the time that surprised me the most, and I was encouraged, was when I, generally speaking, if I'd get a large crowd of young people from colleges that were up to speed on what was happening. They knew about the Fed. Matter of fact, it was a crowd in the University of Michigan that first announced by shouting it, and the Fed, and the Fed. So in a way, there was a lot more people understanding than I ever dreamed of. But the one event that sort of remains in my memory was the one that we did at Berkeley. And Berkeley, is known to be not exactly, a conservative hard money school. And it was the best crowd I had during that campaign. We had like 8,000 people can turn out. And that to me was just unbelievable, because I still saw myself as, tinkering around the edges and making a suggestion, why we're having problem. We're printing too much money. We're not obeying the Constitution. We do this to fight wars, on and on. We wouldn't have a welfare state if you had honest money. So it was a big difference. So the surprise was very positive. So even though I warned college students of the great danger, and I continue to do that, most people, the compliment I enjoy the most is when they say that, you do tell us the truth. Maybe that helps. And I'm an optimist, and that's good. And because I think one time I was expressing that why would they tell me I'm positive when I give them so much bad news? And somebody said something that sort of stuck with me, and I hope this is true. They say, well, what they're doing, why they're responding that way is it's so rare that they hear anybody from Washington telling the truth that they get excited about it. And that to me is a very positive sign that if the people hear the truth, and I think the large majority of the American people and people in general want to hear the truth, and they would respond favorably if we haven't allowed those who are in total opposition to us had not gained so much power and control over the economy and social order. And that's why this cultural Marxism is such a threat.
Absolutely. And I really appreciated after 2008 and 2012, Congressman Paul, how after your campaigns had ended, you declined respectfully to endorse McCain or Romney, opting to promote different ideas and different candidates. Where do you see the future of third parties going here in America?
I think it's fruitless. There's not going to be any. I'm working on a second party, because
against the war party.
Yeah, even though I do see differences, especially this year, between the people who are in power right now versus the others. But almost every day I have an example. Today it was an example. They went to a congressional delegation went to the Ukraine to check things out, and but it was bipartisan, and it's bipartisan support for the Fed and the military-industrial complex, welfareism, deficits. So it's an ingrained result of what happened at our universities, and that's why I think the education is going to come, except for the rare exception on the universities. It has to come from outside the university. And that's why I was and continue to be guardedly excited about the information you can get off the internet, even though, we all are concerned and worried about, censorship and the way that speech can be controlled. But there's still, even, when I'm looking for material, I really look back and admire the people who wrote great books and understood history and philosophy, especially the founders. And they didn't have an internet. Now I can punch up a couple buttons, and for the most part, I can get a lot of good information. At least get the dates straight and get the policy. So the internet is still a tool that we can use, and that's why I always have been optimistic about that, because the libertarians seem to be more aggressive in use of the internet. Why, if there's a complication and they're messing up and they're penalizing us with the internet, why can't somebody come along and have a counter reaction to that? And I think that's happening, to a large degree. I don't like the ideas. All we need is the government come down and lock them down or do something. There can be some changes, with the internet that would still fit private property rights. Matter of fact, I think of the internet right now, it's getting much closer to being an arm of the government. That worries me. But still, I think the internet is a good tool and a way we can get this message out that I talk about, and I can talk to more people than I had in the past.
From a recent show, you and Mr. McAdams announced that you were moving from YouTube to Odyssey. Do you see an emergence of different platforms? And because I like being on YouTube, and YouTube is still the primary source of information. But this, like you were saying, the censorship is really bad. But do you see platforms like Odyssey and others, emerging when it comes to
Rumble is the other one that I think we're going to be working with. Matter of fact, Daniel works with that and takes care of it and keeps me up to date. I always claim that I was never a computer person, but in many ways, hope I understand it very well, the dangers of it and all the good parts of it. So matter of fact, when I left Congress, Daniel and Sircon, who does the technical work, we sat around discussing it. And even though I saw my limitation, I said, what's going to happen, when my concern was when the government cracks down and starts monitoring. The government has cracked down, but they do it through the corporations. And that I think immediately I said, work on alternatives. Always look for an alternative is what we can do, with the internet, and think about the competition where if somebody is trying to cancel us, there has to be an alternative. It looks to me like the internet and the technology is so big that no matter what the government does, there's still going to be some competition out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my favorite things that you did in Congress is whenever you would team up with Congressman Dennis Kucinich from Ohio. And Mike and I got to know him really well during his 2008 campaign for president. Along with attending your events and supporting your campaign, I was also very supportive of Dennis Kucinich's campaign because you guys talked about a lot of the same things, big picture items and foreign policy and war. So what kind of response and feeling would you get from your other colleagues in Congress when they would see you and Dennis teaming up and railing against the military industrial complex and talking about civil liberties and all that? Because a lot of the times it just seemed like it was Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich, like Batman and Robin in Congress, the two voices of reason.
Well, they don't say much because they don't want to draw attention to us. You can get 6 people in Congress that may be Marxists, and they might get millions of dollars worth of free advertisement by getting their positions out there and all kind of activity. But no, if Dennis and I get together, and we did work hard. We brought up some votes and always pointing out the insanities of the wars in the Middle East. No, they didn't talk about that. Back then, even now, they talk more about my position on monetary policy. But back then, when the housing bubble was building, and I was on the banking committee, and I did all this work and gave speeches daily, but they weren't covered. But people like you, and I said, there's somebody out there that's going to hear. And the one way I work on this so I don't get despondent of it all is I believe in the remnant. There's a remnant of people, both in the spiritual sense as well as the philosophic sense with economic. There's always going to be a remnant who's going to cling to the truth and will preserve the truth. That is why, what the founders did is so important. It's there, even though we don't follow much of what we do. Then I, read what the founders were looking at. They were looking back at John Locke. Locke had a tremendous, and some of the words that Locke wrote ended up in the Declaration of Independence. So that to me is just so fascinating that people can achieve things under conditions that seem to be minor. But I think that's what we have to do. We have to preserve. And when people come along and they say, yes, I think he's right on this Federal Reserve, we're getting a little more attention now than before. But there will get a lot more because the Federal Reserve is a total failure and more people are recognizing that. So I think people will come and go, wow, this is true, what has been said. And I don't take credit for all that because I read other people and I keep thinking, wonder what my most original thought has ever been. If you're honest with yourself, it's hard to find stuff because someplace buried in your brain, someplace somebody might have said it, and that doesn't matter. The test is it true or is it not true?
Yeah, that's why, speeches you've given 10, 15, 20, even up to 30 years ago, they get clipped and put on like Twitter or YouTube and all the stuff you were saying. It's like the great comedian George Carlin, the words and the message. No matter what cycle we're in, they continue to resonate and come back. And especially, when it comes to foreign policy. And that's why I was so attracted to your campaign, because you really were one of the only ones up there speaking so truthfully about the American empire and the unintended consequences of what happens with all of our, militarism around the world. So to 2022, where do you see our proxy war with Russia going? What do you think that outcome might be?
Well, I think, the imbalance and the winning side's doing pretty well. I think Russia's doing real well. They're making more money, drilling more oil, and the sanctions have all backfired. And the Europeans, I committed not too wise to go along with, NATO and all that nonsense, and us putting all our missiles over there, as we promised we wouldn't do, right up next to the wall of Russia, that if sanity will break out. They can't destroy it all. But the Europeans have done a lot of damage to themselves. I think it's going to continue. I think they're going to wake up and say, Russia, we hate them. We have to do it. We have to destroy them. But I think there are some people in this country now, because they don't follow non-interventionism and libertarianism, they see Russia as a competitor, so they have to destroy them. And I think I see so many disadvantages that have been gained for us in the conventional sense, because Russia's doing okay. They and China and India might come up with a competing currency, and they certainly won't have a milquetoast military, and we're going to go broke. And when there's a significant rejection of the dollar is when that will happen. The crack is there, and the crack is the value of the dollar can't be measured by other currencies. The crack in the dollar has to be measured by what your bag of groceries cost and what a gallon of gasoline costs. And I'll tell you what, there's a lot of people worried about it, and it's just started.
Yeah, absolutely. And the 2016 GOP primary for president was obviously a three-ring circus. And my brother and I did endorse your son early on, Senator Rand Paul. And, we did some door knocking here in New Hampshire for him, and, wrote op-eds in support of him. What was it like during that campaign to see Donald Trump at the center of that, and then other kind of more seasoned politicians and people who've been running for office for decades? And of course, seeing your son up there, like, would your son call you after a debate and just be like, geez, did you see that, Dad?
You're talking about especially 2016, right?
2016, yeah, when Rand ran in the primary against Donald Trump and everyone else.
Well, it is pretty amazing what happened there. But some people say, they ask what my position was on Trump, and I was pretty quiet. I'd answer the question when they asked me, and I said, no, I haven't endorsed him. And I said, I think he's, he has authoritarian instincts, and usually drop it there. And but I didn't get involved in that discussion, and there was only one time that somebody arranged a call, but anyway, I had a call from him, and I think it was when he was wondering about how to handle libertarians, and
wow.
The only thing I told him then, because it was a very friendly conversation, if you're on the wrong side of that, there's nothing friendly about how he might talk to you. So I said, what, Mr. President, I think the best service you've given the country is the emphasis on going after political correctness. I said, everybody hates it, and nobody will come down hard on it because they're critical. But when from that first debate, when that debate happened, and he went after Megyn Kelly, I mean, that was setting the standard. So it's political correctness is in the intimidation. They cancel you out just by being able to, and then they use the social media to follow through. But still, Trump has, and that's why the left hates him so much. Well, first off, the way I look at that whole deal, yes, at the beginning, how could anybody like that goes after Megyn Kelly and John McCain, how could he be president? So that was pretty amazing that he did that. But he surprised a lot of people,
yeah.
and And I think it's pretty amazing. But I think what happened to the conventional wisdom of most Republicans was that, and the Democrats, nobody could win like that, especially for the Democrats and half of the Republicans. They say, well, this is terrible. He's a terrible person. And but they were jealous. They were jealous. How could this guy do this? So I think they were just so jealous of this guy. So then that didn't work, just being jealous and saying, how bad a guy is. Then they said, we hate him. Right. And everything was driven by hate. My conclusion now that we're seeing this campaign going on, it was that hatred that turned things upside down, made things much worse. And the hatred, what did they do? They were willing to give us Biden and Harris just because we hate Trump the most, and and this is all we have. This is the best we have because we hate him. We got to get rid of him. So Biden and Harris, that'll take care of it. So sometimes you wonder, is there a conspiracy there of total ignorance, or are they just not with it themselves?
That must have been such a surreal phone call. Donald Trump calling Ron Paul. I just got off the phone with Ron Paul. I always trust somebody who has two first names. Okay, I trust him. I like Ron Paul. He's good on liberty. He's good on economics. He's anti-war. He's a very sharp guy. So we just had a great phone call.
It was a beautiful phone call with me in Texas. It was a beautiful phone call. The 2016 campaign kind of reminded me a little bit of some of your appearances on the Morton Downey Jr. show back in the 80s, like the cartoonish nature that it's kind of devolved into. Do you think maybe like the Morton Downey Jr. show kind of predicted how the state of like politics fusing with entertainment would be and what we see now?
Yeah, probably. But there's so many other factors too. Excesses, excessive spending and all that goes on. But the Morton Downey show was maybe, like you could say, he was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff that came out. Now, I guess you refer to that because I was on that one show.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you made one appearance, and you were arguing with a fellow in the crowd, and you were espousing your views seriously, and then you're like, well, you're kind of heavy. You like to eat cheeseburgers. Maybe we should make you go on a diet. I thought that was the best.
But anyway, that was a little bit crazy in a way because I really didn't know what to expect. But it was a shouting match. But I hated it. Because that was, they, matter of fact, coached you before you went on, and they wanted you to fight and yell and scream. And I broke down and did a little bit of that. Then I didn't like it. I looked at the show, and I didn't like it one bit. But then, and I always worried that it would come up in my district and show me in that attitude. It hurt me. Well, it never showed up. Nobody really ever cared, and it went along okay. And I just thought that it was terrible. But when the campaigns turned out, the presidential campaign turned out, and more people were coming, and they go, look at this stuff. The college kids and high school kids thought it was neat. That's what they remembered, and they liked it because it was a different attitude I had. But my approach generally wasn't that way. I didn't think I should participate in that, but I played their game a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, you were on there trying to promote, your policies, and you've always been so consistent about. But of course, like you said, they were coaching you, and it was almost like a precursor to the Jerry Springer show. And I mean, I mean, obviously, I enjoy comedy, but I think it's unfortunate how politics has devolved in our country to just baseline American gladiator, blue team versus red team. But like you said, they're really just one party, and they stick to the same talking points at the end of the day, and they have the same corporate sponsors at their conventions. So at the end of the day, it's like the whole thing, the game is rigged.
Yeah, and a lot of it is. A lot of it is rigged. But I think it's going to get worse, and I think it's a reflection of a bankruptcy. The financial bankruptcy, everybody very frustrated how I'm going to get my share. But I think it's a financial bankruptcy, but there's a moral bankruptcy too. And even though I'm very positive about people maintaining and retaining and have a remnant of people that will not allow truth to disappear, there's a lot of people out there that enjoy it, because I can't stand some of this stuff. I think it was, I don't even know the places that they do these movies, but boy, there was a description of some movie of pedophilia that just was grotesque. And I thought, what's this for? And they show it to kids, and all this transgenderism. Boy, that's bad stuff. I mean, there's nothing scientific about what they're talking about. So, no, the culture certainly has changed, and the cultural Marxists know how to use it, because that's their tool. They use that to divide us, and they want chaos in the streets. And guess what? Right now, if you look at it superficially, they're winning. If you look at it philosophically and what's happening sort of in a quiet way, I think truth and reason is winning out.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we finish up here, Dr. Paul, we just have a couple comments of some support from people. Jordan says, Ron Paul, Ron Paul, Ron Paul.
That's the chant.
One of our favorite chants. Being involved in like 1,000-person Ron Paul chant is one of the most energizing and electric things you could do. So I'm sure it's fun for you on your end. Jason Burmis says, love you guys. Love you to ask Dr. Paul who the dream team administration would be for 2024.
Who's what?
Like a dream team ticket for you in 2024. Who do you think would be a couple of good candidates?
Why would you wish that on anybody? I haven't thought that through enough, because who would be able to do anything with the monsters there? I mean, it'd be a big joke. Today, when Daniel and I did our program, we were talking about sending advisors, to Ukraine, and we mentioned that Kennedy sent advisors, to Vietnam, and then he changed his mind, and he changed his mind, of course, over the Cuban crisis too, but he changed his mind about war, and he said, "I'm getting all the troops out of Vietnam." It was a couple months before he was assassinated. So that's the thing. I don't. People would say, "Well, what would you do if you were the chairman of the Federal Reserve?" You'd have to resign. Why pretend and mislead people to think that anybody has the vaguest notion about what the money supply should be and what the interest rates should be? That would be the crime. It's just saying, if you became a member, you'd be acknowledging the fact you think there is a proper interest rates out there. There's a proper position to be held for personal liberty, and people should have the right to do what they want with their lives, and they are not allowed to hurt other people. That isn't a very complicated philosophy, and it works. It's wonderful. It's the greatest philosophy ever invented, and it allows people to do what they want, spiritually, sexually, philosophically, whatever. Don't hurt anybody. Don't mess around with their property.
Right. Yeah, it's simple, and it's a powerful message. We got one more little message here from our friend Ricky Gray. He lives in Texas. He said, Congressman, I volunteered on your campaign in New Hampshire with the Jackmans, making phone calls while I was on medical leave from the military.
The military support, I was pleased. You asked me before, but what I was pleased with that because I was accused so often in Washington. I'm unpatriotic. I don't care about the military. Yeah, because I won't send troops out into an unwinnable, undeclared, unconstitutional, immoral war, so you call me treasonous, that sort of thing. But when they were doing that the hardest to me in the campaign, it turned out that several of us had been in the military. Anybody who had declared for president, I had most of the donations from the military compared to the rest. So, and I thought, why is that? And then it dawned on me, I was in the military for 5 years. The last thing I wanted was a hot war and having people shoot at me. Why wouldn't these people not want to have somebody that would have a little common sense and express a very, very sound way of staying out of these wars?
Yeah, absolutely. And then our last comment here says Tulsi Gabbard 2024 for president. What do you think about Tulsi, Dr. Paul?
Could be.
Well, I like her, and she's been on my program. And her most important thing, I don't know all her details, but why she's so important is she was an individual, thinks for herself, knows how to present herself, and she will take a position as a totally independent. Fortunately for us who like libertarianism, and I hope she doesn't feel offended that I use that, libertarian ideas of non-intervention, because it was her foreign policy that got my attention, once I heard about her.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, that's about all the time we were able to do with you today, Dr. Paul, but I'm just humbled that you came on, and I can't say it enough. Thank you for everything you've done for our country, for elevating liberty, raging against the machine for real, and being a lone voice of reason. You've inspired millions of people, Dr. Paul, around the world. So it's truly an honor.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. It was nice to be on your program.
Absolutely. Well, we hope you'll come back. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Check out the Ron Paul Liberty Report that Dr. Paul hosts with Dan McAdams and the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you here next time.